When will inflation come down? I could answer this question by pointing to the inflation forecasts of private forecasters or of pharmaceutical companies, which broadly show a significant decline over the next year. The forecast
Hello, welcome to Financial Stockholm. I'm Christopher Crystal. Today is December 7th, 2022, Wednesday, the 7th of December. And these are what we're seeing going on in the Swedish press and reactions to it. So it's our interpretation, and I hope to keep you abreast of what's happening here. So in the local press, we have discussions about the Swedish healthcare. There's a COVID vaccination level that is dropping in terms of the latest boosters. People are less willing to take it or less likely to take it. We're seeing that there are more people being admitted to the hospitals with COVID. So the tone of the article is somewhat skeptical about the people and really kind of saying how people should be taking this vaccination. Although now we know that these vaccinations do not really hinder your catching it, and in some cases have been shown that you will have an increased likelihood of catching it, the COVID. So it's an issue that puts pressure on the hospitals because people are still getting COVID and then they're going to the hospital. But I think also what's one of the issues here is that we have a increase or rising level of shootings in Sweden. And the problem is when a hospital staff has the call for a shooting, they have an all hands on deck reporting down to the emergency room. This is treated with the highest priority. So you have individuals being called in for surgeries and so forth that cancel out other operations ongoing within the hospital. So if this occurs at the same time that you have a increase or spike in COVID, you may have had the staff for the handling of the COVID, but then once you have the shooting occurring, you have a staffing call where everybody has to respond. So which would lower your preparedness for COVID. So I think that's really what's not discussed within the article, but one of the key issues. And so this really kind of comes back to an issue of Swedish society and what's happening here and the level of violence and the response to it, and how to get our society back on track to where it was, where you have less violence and less shootings and less bombings or cars blowing up in the middle of our best cities. So another point that was also raised was about the anorexia treatment. Now this is a body dysmorphia issue, and the anorexia apparently was a negative treatment for the woman who's interviewed in the article, and then they cite other cases. So perhaps we see a change or a shift in how body dysmorphia will be handled. And I'm not sure what that will be, but there may be changes. Now, we're very hard against steroids in Sweden. You can go to jail for something like up to 7 years for using steroids, which is significantly less than what you would get for rape, and perhaps as long as you would get for a murder. So there may be some changes coming, we don't know. But that's something that would be looked at in terms of how they're treating body dysmorphia issues. And then on the business side, they raise the issues about risk capital because that's all the harder to come by these days. And so the local paper focuses on how middle-aged white men are getting more money than inexperienced younger colleagues who have little experience in an industry are not receiving the same amount of money. So the article focuses on a woman who was doing an online pharmacy, and she had less of an attraction from the private equity firms and for her online pharmacy company. But we recently had another company which canceled its IPO, and that was one of these Rutger Arnhult, and he has a large exposure within real estate. He is one of the more leveraged real estate holders, but his IPO for his pharmacy firm was canceled recently or put on hold. So I think really it's more about the market saying how we're going to award money to merit value as opposed to what would be nicer in terms of ESG, SDG goals. They're looking to make a profit, and that's how businesses are generally run. So but I think it's a general, I think what's important to note is that the private equity market, the financing is being turned down. and going more towards instruments that will return income and return on investment in shorter periods of time, and therefore you would want to have a higher merit value ranking to the business that you're discussing. On top of that, we have electricity prices continue to climb. That's not going to help us on inflation, although we do see diesel and gasoline prices coming down, so that's going to help us on inflation. Food costs seems to continue to climb, so that's not going to help. But the housing market is dropping, and we're seeing slower sales. So this may help us on the inflation ratings, and perhaps slow the hiking by the Swedish Riksbank, or our Swedish National Bank, or equivalent to the Swedish Fed is probably the best way to put it. And then, of course, the risk rating at companies like Castellum and other ones are being reviewed and possibly lowered. But those were the companies that had higher risk levels due to higher debt exposure. So SBB, which is discussing with the market about doing a planned spinoff, was trading a little higher, so they're unimpacted by the events at Castellum. But this is now, you've had a executive switch, so you have individuals who used to be at companies like Castellum and Fabergé now working at SBB. So maybe the market favors them better now. And then in terms of the Swedish Society, we have no change really on the violence. We have no change on events that are occurring. However, there have been recent court cases where we've seen individuals that have been tried for serious crimes like rape and murder, and they are not being shown the door to be let out of the country or extradited out of the country, despite the fact they had no Swedish citizenship. They only had a permit to be here. And most people would consider an act of violence a revocation of that permit. However, the Swedish system has not considered it that way. And so this is causing a lot of stir. And this is probably why you've seen a lot of shift in the polling about the coalition government, because the Sverigedemokraterna, or the Swedish Democrats, had a strong policy and a campaign saying they would get rid of the people who were destroying Sweden and were not citizens. And they also have this widely known reputation of having a number of Nazis within their party, and actual Nazi participants, celebrating at these events. And yet they have not done anything within this cycle yet to show these people the door. So there's a little bit of a question about being raised by people like the Social Democrats, who are the last coalition party leader, and that is being discussed in the paper. And then, of course, they raise an issue about the weather and our climate policy and the right approach for our energy. Now, they led us through the closing of nuclear reactors at Oskarshamn. They led us through reactor closings at 1 and 2 of Ringholm, and they stand behind and say, well, it was Vattenfall that pushed this through. However, their government was in charge in 2016 when that was done, and their government was in charge in 2019 when it was done at Oskarshamn. And now we have the most expensive prices in Europe, and we're in a real energy crisis, and they're coming out with their proposals, which is kind of a little bit late. Thanks for playing. So we'll see if those polls will change back towards Moderaterna and Liberalerna and Christian Democrat for energy policy, if they come out with an energy policy, if they can make the announcement about the nuclear deal. As I mentioned, GE Hitachi has not put that out on their press site to say the deal is going through with Sweden, despite having released information that it is going through with Poland to build 2 nuclear reactors. So we need something to be done. We're in our cold season. People are burning wood. So we're putting a lot more carbon in the atmosphere, and carbon is being blamed for the main driver in the climate change. And then, of course, we're putting up more particulates into the atmosphere. So that's not helpful. And we're doing that through wood burning. And we'll see what that leads to. But there's an article talking about the recent cold snap we're getting in Sweden, which would be considered very normal. They're saying it is now below the normal cold weather. And I can tell you, when I came to Sweden over 20 years ago, Stockholm winter was -20 at this time. So I'm not sure what they mean, because Stockholm winter right now was only about -2. And these are all centigrade for those of you who don't understand the difference between European temperature standards and Western American and UK standards in Fahrenheit. So the level of temperature seems to be relatively normal in my recollection, but we'll see what happens. What else is being discussed? A little bit about FTX, the cryptocurrency, but the Swedish press is focusing more on Taylor Swift, which means that the exposure for the Swedish economy should be relatively low, and that's a good sign. But I think what really this unveils is that Swedes were not exposed to the FTX scandal, and the blockchain value will be seen as a higher value, and why you should stick with blockchain within the cryptos. I'm not a crypto fan. It's not an asset-backed security, so why would you trust this? I would say something like a BRICS currency would be, or a BRICS plus currency would be something that would be more interesting, because then you would have underlying commodity values, and that's still being discussed. But before I'd put money in a crypto, I'd probably look at a BRICS plus currency before anything else. But that's just me. And then also discussed is Tesla. They're having problems in Germany in their staffing, in their electricity plant, or their electrical vehicle plant. And the big competitor down there is Volkswagen. So, I think the American approach versus the German approach naturally favors the locals. So what would I anticipate? I wouldn't say anything big, but I would say probably you would see declining sales of Tesla in Europe, because Europe has, or the EU has recently enacted a policy against goods being shipped in, and would favor local produced products. So Tesla may be shifting over to Asia, where they have a better power grid. Even with their own power grid suggestions or power solutions, they would probably shift to where it's already been built to them. That, of course, would be China and India, possibly Vietnam. We'll see what happens. So that's on the Tesla front. We do also have electrical vehicles in terms of bicycles that are rented in Stockholm. They're being shown to have a failure rate that is unacceptable, and causing an issue with electrical vehicle rentals. And so we'll see what happens there. But I think one of the key issues that's missed by the Swedish press is that China is lessening the lockdown policy on COVID, and this could be seen as a potential lift for the global GDP. So we'll watch what happens. This comes on the back of the slowing manufacturing orders, and the recently announced Chinese shipping degrade by 11%, where you saw Chinese shipping go down by about 11%. So all in all, what we're seeing in Sweden is people trying to prepare for Christmas. We have retailers also announcing packages of savings packages, which means layoffs at some of our larger retail chains. That may also mean that some of the goods are not going to be sold, and we'll have some disappointments. But right now, we're hoping it's going to be a good Christmas, but it doesn't look likely. So remember, you can always make money in the market, whether you're short or whether you're long. You're going short-term investing or long-term investing. There's always money to be made, and we wish you success within your investing environment. Thank you.